Since the dawn of history, the restless ocean has awed and fascinated all who go down to the sea in ships. They've wondered at the rhythmic ebb and flow and the power of the tides. They've wondered, too, why high tides vary above sea level from 1 foot in height or less to 50 feet in height or more. Nowhere in the world do the tides vary so dramatically as on the shores of Nova Scotia. On the Atlantic coast, the rise and fall is from 6 to 9 feet. At Knoll, on the other side of the peninsula, in the Bay of Fundy, the tide may, under certain astronomical conditions, have a range of 53 feet, the highest recorded tide in the world. In many areas, at low tide, mudflats extend a mile or even farther to the channel's edge, and the rivers emptying into the Bay of Fundy become mere trickles. But during the next 6 hours, the incoming tide will fill every bay, river, and inlet to overflowing. What creates these phenomenal tides of Fundy? Men have long known that the tides are associated with the moon. The distant moon pulls at the earth with the mysterious attraction called gravity. Now, the force of gravity decreases with distance. The pull of the moon on the earth is, therefore, slightly greater on the face nearest the moon than on the other. Halfway between, it is average. The forces on each side can be considered as the average, plus a small force on one side and less a small force on the other. These small differences act in opposite directions. It can be shown that they act in part along the Earth's surface, and these are the tide-raising forces. Their strength varies over the globe. As the Earth rotates, each place experiences a varying force that reverses twice every revolution, that is, twice a day. The sun has a similar but smaller effect. The great oceans respond to this rhythmic force, swinging back and forth like water in a basin that is tilted to and fro. Thus the tides are created. In turn, these ocean tides, acting at the entrance to a coastal inlet, cause a similar swinging motion in the water inside, in rhythm with the rise and fall at the mouth. This motion is in the form of a wave that swings up to the head of the Gulf and is then reflected back to the ocean. In a very long gulf, the returning wave meets the rising tide, and so the surface rocks like a seesaw about a line midway up the gulf. If the length of this gulf is halved, something special can happen. Now, as the wave swings up the gulf, it is reinforced by the inward thrust from the ocean tide. And returning sooner down the short gulf, it now coincides with the ebb tide and swings out in the great withdrawal of water into the ocean. And so it is with the Bay of Fundy, which has just the right dimensions to set up the greatest rocking motion and hence the highest tides in the world. The tremendous surge of water up and down the Bay of Fundy causes several phenomena, such as the reversing falls at St. John. To reach the harbor, the St. John River flows over a shallow sill and through a gorge too narrow to allow the river level to keep pace with the ebb tide. This creates the falls. But the falls become completely stilled when the incoming tide reaches the level of the river. As the tide continues to rise, the flow through the gorge is reversed because the tide in the harbor eventually rises to a level 13 feet above that of the river. Further up the bay, millions of tons of water surging into and out from Minas Basin through irregular Minas Channel cause dangerous tide rips and overfalls. If harnessed, the power potential here is estimated at close to 6 million horsepower. Then there are tidal bores, which occur in most of the rivers at the head of the bay. As the flooding tide forces its way up the shallow slopes of the riverbeds, bottom friction causes the front of the wave to become steep and appear as an advancing wall of water. This front may vary from 1 to several feet in height. Bores may be seen on the Petitcodiac, the Shubenacadie, Salmon, Meander, and other rivers flowing into the upper reaches of the Bay of Fundy. Here we see the inlets fill up in 10 seconds. In reality, the tide takes nearly 4 hours after the arrival of the bore to reach its full height. Then every river is full to overflowing. Over the years, the low marshlands have been reclaimed and protected from the sea by dikes. And so, in many areas along the Fundy shore, fertile farmlands reach to the edge of the incoming sea. Beyond the dikes, commerce is geared to the ebb and flow of the tides. It's not unusual to see an ocean-going freighter apparently maneuvering its way through a hayfield. Pilots bring the freighters in with the incoming tide, and before taking them to dockside, turn them about, ready to leave on another high tide. At low tide, while the vessels are resting on mattresses built on the muddy riverbeds, they are loaded with raw materials from the Fundy area. It may be sawn lumber from Parsboro, pulpwood from Port Williams, barium from Walton, gypsum from Hansport. From these and other ports, ocean-going freighters carry produce from the mines, forests, and farmlands of Nova Scotia to foreign markets. Fishermen also use the tides of the bay, building weirs to do their fishing for them. These 40-foot weirs are often completely covered at high tide, but in the space of 6 hours, 16 billion tons of water drain out through Minas Channel, and the weirs stand exposed. As soon as the tide is low enough, the fishermen enter the weir and, using a seine net, corral the fish that have become trapped in the weir between tides. Of the many different species of fish that come in with the tides, the Atlantic salmon is the most valuable. Further down the bay, herring enter weirs by the thousands. Here, the fishermen use a purse seine to collect the fish. They are pumped into the holds of herring carriers for delivery to nearby factories. Weirs of many kinds and shapes stretch out into the bay, and they must be tended night and day at each low tide, regardless of weather. Near Tennecape, fishermen travel almost a mile to reach their brush weirs, and sometimes they use novel ways to get there. Flounder, bass, and shad are most often caught in these shallow pools, but any fish common to these waters may find itself left behind by the tide, even sturgeon. As the tide recedes, seaweeds begin to show themselves. Dulse, a delicate, graceful seaweed, is gathered in large quantities. It is edible and health-giving. When eaten, perhaps far from where it was gathered, it still has the tang of the sea. Anchoring themselves by holdfasts to the rocks and ledges, the seaweeds grow like veritable gardens in the sea. Against this background, barnacles glisten like jewels. Exposed to the air, they look lifeless. Underwater, they are very busy little sea animals. Their cirri flick in and out as they feed on minute forms of life the eye cannot see. This little animal looks like a fast-moving snail, but it's only a tiny hermit crab that has borrowed a snail shell to live in. Clams are a gourmet's delight. They live in pockets just beneath the surface of the mud or sand in areas rich in the minute organisms on which they feed. The trap rock, or basalt, typical of the Fundy shore, contains quartz varieties such as chalcedony, amethyst, agate, jasper, and other semi-precious stones. These minerals were formed in the Triassic age, when quartz carried traces of coloring elements such as manganese and iron into the cracks and pockets of the trap rock. As it cooled, the beautiful color and design of the semi-precious stones were formed. Much of this shore is like a museum of geology, showing life as it was millions of years ago. In the cliffs of Joggins, casts of trees of an older era, like Sigillara and Calamites, are seen. Flora and fauna appear like pictures imprinted in the rocks. Even casts of dinosaur footprints occur in younger rocks along this shore. Ancient seabeds are exposed here, and groups of basalt lava flows tower up at 5 islands, North Mountain, Cap d'Or, and intermittently along the shore. At Briar Island, the basalt takes the form of pillars, almost hexagonal in shape. Tides and weather are the sculptors still at work on the shores of Fundy. Even the tough basalt cannot protect the red sandstone and shale cliffs for long. These red beds will continue to give their color to the shores and waters in the upper reaches of the bay. But the tides of Fundy were determined long, long ago, when great upheavals shaped the bay with the dimensions necessary to create such phenomenal tides. In this area, the distant past unfolds, and the unknown future is contained in the enduring rhythm of the sea, in the tides and currents that continually mold these shores.